Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cavan-Smith. Tonight, 7 years later, and victims are still awaiting justice. Rights campaigners addressed an open letter to Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara, demanding that he do more to prosecute abusers from the country's 2010 post-electoral crisis. Also, at least 17 deaths from hemorrhagic fever are recorded in an area of DR Congo where an Ebola outbreak is later confirmed. We take a closer look. And let it spoil. Moroccan authorities are taken by surprise at the pace at which an originally online boycott campaign has spread. Organisers are targeting the high prices of some products, accusing producers of abusing their monopolies. But first, 10 national and international human rights groups have sent a joint letter to Ivory Coast's president. It calls on Alassane Ouattara to deliver on his promise to pursue perpetrators of abuses committed during the country's 2010 post-electoral crisis. After former President Laurent Gbagbo refused to cede power to Ouattara, at least 3,000 people were killed and dozens of women raped in unrest. Armed forces on both sides were blamed. But 7 years later, and no one's faced trial in Ivory Coast. Rights groups say that they've sent the letter now because of reports that the government may be preparing an amnesty for officials charged with crimes against humanity. Liane de Bosson-Pierre joins us with more. Liane, was there a need for this letter? Is there anything to these rumours of an amnesty law?
Well, Georgia, those rumours surfaced last month, and I think these agencies that have released this open letter to the president now, they want to, so to say, profiter, as we say in French, to take advantage of the spotlight that has been placed on the issue for the moment. Alassane Ouattara is more than halfway through his second term in office. He only has 2 years left, and if any trials are to take place, it's going to happen in the next 2 years. He spoke about it very often just after he came into power in 2011, after his inauguration, again when he sent two of the former regime, sent them to the Hague. You spoke about it again in 2015 when Simone Gbagbo was arrested. Last year it came up again when she was then acquitted. She's the only person who has stood trial from that era. And as you mentioned earlier, nobody else has stood trial, even though dozens of people have been arrested.
So are Ivorians convinced that with all that being as it is, President Ouattara is actually possessing of the political will to follow through on his promise of justice for victims of the crisis?
Well, Georgia, as I just mentioned, there are only 2 years left, and the feeling here in Ivory Coast at the moment is that everyone is preparing for the election. It does not seem that they will be setting up several trials ahead of that. An amnesty could mean that it could put the whole issue that everyone gets a blanket amnesty for that very tragic period in Ivory Coast history. There's a blanket amnesty and everyone just kind of puts it to bed before the 2020 election. But, you know, as I said, it's been mentioned so often before, Ivorians really don't the sense that the president is being serious about this, about people standing trial for what had happened.
Thanks very much, Liane de Bosson-Pierre, there, our regional correspondent. In DR Congo, at least 17 people have died in an area where an outbreak of Ebola has been confirmed. The deaths happened before authorities were certain that the deadly disease was present. Ebola was named after the eastern Congolese river, where it was discovered in the 1970s. The country sees regular flare-ups that have been quickly isolated in the past. Thomas Nicolon tells us more about this latest outbreak.
It's the 9th time an Ebola outbreak has been recorded in the Democratic Republic of Congo since the virus was discovered in this very country in 1976. Now, the two confirmed cases this time are located in the northwestern town of Bikoro in the Equator province, but local health officials also reported 17 deaths of hemorrhagic fever in that same area, although the link with Ebola is still to be confirmed. The previous Ebola outbreak had been recorded less than a year ago in the Bawele province. 8 people had been infected back then, and of whom 4 had died. Now a team of Doctors Without Borders is already in the field in Bikoro, and a team of medical experts from the government will leave on Wednesday.
Thomas Nicolon there for us. Look now at some news in brief. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari headed back to London for medical reasons on Tuesday. The 75-year-old spent more than 5 months in the UK last year for medical treatment for an undisclosed illness. He said he plans to be home by the weekend, but his time away has raised questions about whether he's healthy enough to run for a second term in next year's polls. The International Monetary Fund reckons that growth across sub-Saharan Africa will continue to pick up this year, but it has raised concerns about the levels of debt in poorer countries. Growth is predicted to hit about 3.4% across the region. Ethiopia, Ghana, Ivory Coast and Rwanda are amongst the top performers, with strong maintained growth predicted in the medium term. On the other end are debt-distressed nations like Equatorial Guinea and South Sudan. In Libya, Islamic State extremists claimed responsibility for a suicide car bombing in which 2 people were killed on Tuesday. It happened at a checkpoint about 70 kilometers from the eastern port of Ras Lanuf. Troops later destroyed a second car bomb. It comes a day after Khalifa Haftar, head of the Libyan National Army, announced the start of an offensive to liberate the city of Derna from jihadists. Libya is preparing for elections this year, even though it's still extremely unstable, and militants continue to carry out regular attacks. Now, 17 Nigerians who were shipwreck survivors are suing Italy in the European Court of Human Rights. The plaintiffs say that Rome is liable for abuses they suffered at the hands of the Libyan Coast Guard because of a deal which used EU funds to train African patrols to stop migrants from reaching Europe. Italy is accused of sending migrants back to notorious Libyan detention centres. The Nigerians were on a dinghy that went down off the coast of Libya last year. The Coast Guard and an aid group, Sea-Watch, both responded. The plaintiffs believe that those saved by Sea-Watch were the lucky ones.
Sea-Watch sought to rescue migrants in distress at all costs, while the Libyan Coast Guard resorted to violence and careless behavior to intercept and pull back the migrants. Ultimately, 59 people were brought back to safety in Italy by Sea-Watch, while 47 were intercepted and brought back to Libya, where we know that several of them were subjected to grave violations. More than 20 people died.
Well, 3 major Moroccan groups have been targeted by a boycott campaign in a bid to pressure them to lower prices for water, milk and fuel. The targeted businesses are accused of keeping prices artificially high. Our correspondents report.
Rejected. This brand of waters from one of the companies faced with a popular boycott in Morocco. Since April the 20th, the boycott movement has spread quickly across the country, targeting the high cost of living.
A moment of solidarity has been declared. Prices are rising and wages don't reflect this. It's not normal.
As the movement's grown, orders on boycotted products have shrunk.
Suppliers are coming to us, begging us to buy their products because they have too much stock. But I tell them that I don't have the money to buy a product. I won't be able to sell. It's the customers who decide. We can't do what we want.
Water, milk and petrol brands have been targeted by the boycott. Service stations have also been affected by a drop in sales. To explain the soaring prices at the pump, these trade unionists blame the cutting of fuel subsidies 2 years ago. They say that market competition that should have benefited customers ultimately only benefits the distributors.
The 5 big Moroccan distributors currently hold around 80 to 85% of the market. They dictate the final price.
This belief is clearly shared by the crowds of people attending public meetings where Moroccans are open about their support for the boycott.
The Moroccan people have decided to do this because we can't survive anymore.
Food prices are as high as Europe, while the minimum Moroccan wage here is worth around 230 euros. It's ridiculous.
It is still difficult to quantify the economic impact of this social network movement, but some polls say it could be supported by over 80% of Moroccans.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.